Today's special midweek midterm debrief episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We work with non-profit and community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe to develop campaign strategies, train engagement staff in leadership and power building, and help you execute your campaign with data-driven tactics and actions. And in 2022, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action, and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also proudly brought to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Morris Blackburn Lawyers have the experience you need on your side when something goes wrong. They know the law inside and out and will explain every detail without legal jargon so you can feel comfortable and fully understand your situation. They know how the system works and have the expertise and resources to continue to standing up for clients on matters where others might just give up. So to go find out more about Morris Blackburn Lawyers, you need to go to their website, morrisblackburn.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast out, well, every Friday, but we're doing a special one this week because the midterm elections were on last week and our good friend from the United States, Democratic strategist Jonae Wartel and former Georgia runoff state director in the runoffs in 2021 will be back on the show. If you remember, we had Jonae on a couple of weeks ago to do a bit of a preview, and she's come back on today just to do a bit of a review of the midterms, which were elections for a third of the Senate, all of the House races, and a number of governor races or gubernatorial races across the United States on Tuesday last week. So Jonae will be on the show today to unpack all of the results and the hows and the whys of the results. But a great result for the Democrats. Don't forget, obviously, we've got another episode coming out this Friday, which is our second installment of our Victorian election weekly recap with David Feeney and Emma Dawson. And we'll have another one of those next week. And we're also going to be doing a live telecast for election night, which is on Saturday evening, the 26th of November, when all the other channels are going to do their election night coverage. We're going to give you an incredibly biased left-wing election night coverage. We did it at the start of the year for the federal election campaign. And we're going to do it again. So join myself and our comrades from the week on Wednesday, Ben Davidson and Van Badham, and special guests to unpack the results as they come in across the great state of Victoria. So look out for links to that live telecast in the coming days. And don't forget, if you like the show, be sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. And when you're done listening to the episode, leave us a review. And for all the updates, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay, let's get to today's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Wednesday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And joining me on the line is becoming our resident Democratic strategist slash podcaster to give us an update about how things are transpiring with elections in the United States. Obviously, it was in midterms last Tuesday in the United States, Wednesday morning into Wednesday afternoon here in Australia. Jonae Wartel, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
It's great to be here.
And under better circumstances, I think, than possibly what we thought we would be doing when we were going to do this post-election breakdown, right?
Yes, indeed. Indeed. I'm certainly happier with this outcome than I would have been with the alternative.
To be fair to you, though, when we did do our pre-midterm podcast, breaking down the races, to be fair, you did say, without being specific, but effectively alluding, because I tried to draw you on a prediction, but you weren't prepared to do that. But you did allude to the fact that you felt good about the Senate. You thought, okay, I think there's a good chance the Democrats can hold the Senate and that the House would be close. And it turns out not only are you a saint, but you're also a Nostradamus, because that's exactly what happened.
Yes, it is indeed what happened. I'm very pleased at the accuracy there. We didn't see the red wave that some predicted. And I think that given, historically what happens during the midterm election when you have, a sitting president, I think some were right to be cautiously optimistic about the outcomes. But I'm really pleased to see that we were, able to really in the House not have the serious losses that might have been predicted, and hold on to the Senate. And I think going into this Georgia runoff, being in an even better place in the Senate than we were after last year is truly phenomenal.
For those who are not familiar with the United States politics, history was made with this result in that it broke a trend that had been going as far back as I think the Kennedy administration. Can you just sort of talk us through why history was made? Why was the orthodoxy that it would be a red wave and that it didn't happen?
Well, traditionally in the midterm elections, it is just that, the middle of the term of a presidency. And because you've had 2 years of whoever the sitting president is and whatever party he's from, typically that election is seen as kind of a referendum on, or report card on how the sitting president is doing. And, whether or not they've made good on campaign promises, whether, folks feel like um, they've been able to really execute on their agenda. Folks either reward or punish, so to speak, the party that's in power. And so that's why, in this case with a sitting Democratic president, we predicted a red wave because, we assume given the challenges that any sitting president will have when he, is 2 years into his term, that we would see a backlash there. But that's not, in fact, what we saw. President Biden had a better midterm election than a president's had in decades. And I think that was really, a result of a number of things. I think many can speculate that, there were some bad candidates on the ballot, some election deniers, the influence of Donald Trump and what we'd witnessed in the last 2 years. And also that folks felt like the country was more so headed in the right direction on some key policies. Perhaps there are still areas, and certainly there are areas where we're still not seeing the progress that we need, but that it was better going forward than going backwards. And I think that many folks embrace that belief.
Well, let's unpack some of the results, and I want to start with the Senate. In which there are 100 senators, only a certain amount, a third of them were up for election. The Democrats currently held 50, with the tiebreaker being the vice president. And as we speak tonight / this morning, the Democrats hold 50 senators and the Republicans hold 49. And the Democratic wins were Nevada, or the main ones anyway, that we sort of talked about when we're doing the midterm preview was Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and the GOP wins were Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and obviously Georgia. Your home state is going to a runoff. We'll talk about Georgia in a moment. But let's sort of just move through. I just want to get your thoughts on some of these key wins for the Democratic Party in the Senate, starting with Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. I'm not going to do this again. An amazing result for John Fetterman. And
Yeah.
I have to be honest with you, I was worried about this one in particular. I didn't think it was going to win, which frustrated me because Dr. Ross is a complete dickhead. But I was just like, I thought, have the Democrats got the right candidate? And God damn it, he got in. He just got in, and it was an amazing result.
Yes. I think, I'm always rooting for my home state of Georgia to see the best outcomes there. But I think this was definitely, to your point, one of the other races I was watching. It was certainly rooting for Fetterman, not just on election night, but I've been rooting for him since I saw Mesman Oz get in this race, right? I was just like, this guy, I mean, the gaffes, just the, first being a Trump back candidate, an election denier, someone who's just someone you didn't want to see on your TV screen. And then you had, John Fetterman. I think you really just saw his victory as a win for Team Normal, a win for decency, right? And so, I think not only was, did Oz have a really a bad start in fact, being a Trump back candidate at a time when Trump was really, so problematic for the party. But you just saw him not even campaign well, not even campaign strongly, mock someone who had an illness. As a TV doctor, you're mocking someone who has an illness. I mean, no one like that is fit to serve in any chamber or any, in any elected office. And so, you have being a bad candidate running a bad campaign on top of being a candidate that's backed by, the former president. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So I'm very glad that the folks of Pennsylvania saw right through that and were able to make the right choice.
Moving up to New England to New Hampshire. In the end, it was a reasonably comfortable result for Maggie Hassan, but I think she got 53% of the vote over Donald Bolduc. But I remember watching Ted Cruz on Fox News one night predicting that would be an easy result for the GOP, but in the end, it was a good win for the Democrats and for Maggie.
Yeah, New Hampshire Democrats are such a fascinating group of Democrats, and that they really do lock in, campaign hard, and elect some phenomenal candidates, especially Democratic women candidates. And seeing Hassan go for her second term, I think what I saw was that she had a proven record of being a fighter, a proven record as being somebody who could go to Washington and get things done. And I think that, she was able to really capitalize on this embrace of normal, this embrace of we're headed in the right direction, and we need folks who are going to keep working to make sure that we achieve better results for the American people. So I really do feel like she was a candidate that was in the right time, in the right moment, really bringing a common sense campaign that really resonated with New Hampshire voters. So really excited to see Senator Hassan going back to the Senate.
Another Democrat incumbent that is going to return to Washington is in the great state of Arizona. Mark Kelly held off a challenge from Blake Master to hold his seat, his Senate seat in Arizona, and it continues to be a strong state for Democrats. Another great result, strong candidate against, I think Blake Masters is another election denying Trumper, right?
Yep.
So another win for Team Normal.
Another win for Team Normal. Seeing voters handily reject election deniers is, I think, a win, not just for the state, not for just the people of Arizona, but also just a win for democracy. When you see folks who have peddled this false narrative throughout their campaign, campaigned on it, who peddled this lie and trummed up, a lot of folks to believe it, you don't deserve to hold any elected office. And so I'm really glad that not only is Mark Kelly a phenomenal public servant campaigner, but Blake Masters was just so clearly not the right choice. So my hope is that silences him once and for all.
And then a neighboring state in Arizona, just moving a little bit more further to the west, in Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto won in a close race, like a cliffhanger.
Yes.
And in fact, I think it was the last race. It was the Senate count that tipped the Democrats into a majority.
Yes.
Kept the Senate in Democratic control. Another great win as well against another crazy candidate that the Republicans put up. I feel like that, and both. I always, in my mind, I just sort of group Nevada and Arizona together in sort of these two sort of western states that have like a purple state. They're always going to be close contests. There's a lot of shit going on, a lot of local politics going on. So a great win for Catherine as well.
Yes, and that was a nail biter, as you mentioned. Folks were looking at the results of that race throughout the weekend, and really glad that she was able to pull that race off. But it was a close one. I mean, it was closely watched, hotly contested, in a very close margin. I think it was, not only again a win for someone who was the right choice to send back to the Senate, but I think it showed that these margins weren't landslides, right? These were candidates that had to run strong campaigns, had to run strong messaging campaigns to really show voters that there was a clear choice here, right? We couldn't just bank on, he's the GOP opponent. He's a part of, he's got extremist beliefs. I think we had to really make sure that voters understood that there was a choice here and asked them to make the right choice. And so it was a matter of, yes, flawed candidates, but also good campaigning.
And the one I want to ask you about now is Georgia. Obviously, it's going to go to another runoff. Geez, at one moment there that if the Democrats hadn't jagged either Arizona or Nevada, it would have come. I thought, here we go again. It's going to come down to a runoff in terms of who decides control of the Senate, and they're going to send Jonae back down there again, and she's going to work her magic. I know that's what's going to happen. Were you thinking the same thing at some point?
I was indeed. I mean, I almost couldn't believe it. I had friends texting me and being like, "Can you believe it?" And I'm like, no, actually, I can't." And I guess it's it was always a scenario that we thought was possible, right? Because I think all the polling did show it kind of neck and neck with that race, and I think it's always one possible outcome. But wow, I was sitting on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning thinking, is this really happening? Might the control of the Senate come back down to Georgia? But really, it was for a moment ground zero in the battle for the soul of the Senate. So was excited to see the Democrats clinch the majority, but also really excited about this runoff election because I think there's some clear markers set on what kind of race this needs to be, what kind of ground operation that Democrats need to have in order to pull out this victory.
Georgia, I mean, the whole idea of having these runoffs, I mean, it's just stupid. They've got to get rid of this. Like, because if it's going to be so close, all you need to do is run a third candidate, an independent, and it's just going to force a runoff every single time.
Yeah, I mean, we are a free and fair democracy, and we want folks to have access to the ballot, and so this is what it yields. I do think, though, now that we're in a runoff and we've got just two candidates, it's just going to be about making a clear choice between the two. The message of this campaign is all about making sure that voters know, like, you have a proven fighter in Senator Warnock, and you have Herschel Walker, who doesn't have a record of serving anything but himself. So it's a clear contrast, but boy, it'd be much easier to do the first time around.
Oh, absolutely. And it is, you're right. It is a clear contrast, yet the results between the two candidates are so close, which makes me think, what are you thinking when you're voting for Herschel Walker? It's
Yes. You think, wow, it shouldn't even be close, and it's close.
Yeah.
So, we've got to go back to make that same case to voters, and not just make the case, but mobilize voters to go to the polls in such a short time window, that, we have 4 weeks less than we did last time. And so, getting voters educated about new early voting dates, how they can cast their ballot, when they should cast their ballot, is going to be critically important to every single effort on the ground. So that's going to be the work of the next 4 weeks of the Warnock campaign, of the entire Democratic apparatus on the ground in Georgia. And so I can't wait to see it all unfold.
Florida and Ohio, the Republicans managed to hold on to those two Senate seats. I kind of thought that maybe there was a chance that Ohio might come our way. I thought that, and forgive me, I forgot the name of the candidate that were running in Ohio.
Tim Ryan.
Yeah, I liked his campaign. I liked what he was saying.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought that
Sent me
suited
all these texts.
Yeah,
It was kind of a running joke amongst a lot of Democratic operatives that we were getting like a lot of text messages from him. I think I probably got the most from Tim Ryan of any candidate. I was very optimistic about, Tim Ryan's chances. He ran a really spirited campaign. I really felt like his campaign, even more than some of the other campaigns I've watched, really reflected like true Ohio Midwestern values. It was that common sense campaign. He's been such a champion for progressive values, and I think I assumed a more probably positive outcome, and it wasn't the outcome we'd hoped for. So that was a bit of a disappointment, I'll say.
It's for Australian listeners. Tim Ryan's campaign is the closest I think you can get to what a traditional Labor Party campaign is in Australia, where the messaging is really focused around jobs, good paying
Yes.
jobs, union jobs, but also that mix of sort of more modern progressive social
Yes.
policy issues as well, and really earthy and grounded communicator. Does that mean that Florida and Ohio is just do we just write that off now for the Democrats in terms of where they're going to allocate resources?
Well, I think Democrats have some clear challenges there. Those Ohio and Florida have been trending away from Democratic control over the last few election cycles. 2012, I believe, was the last time that we won in Florida, and I think that was probably the case with Ohio, though might have been 2008 in Ohio. And so we've got some real challenges there. So I think we need to take a step back and look at what is a long term investment in messaging look like, and organizing look like for those states. I'll speak to Florida more specifically because it's a state in my geographic neck of the woods, where winning in a place like Florida takes a very complex multi-tiered strategy. You have a very diverse electorate in Florida. You don't just have white, black, Latino. There are many, there are Cuban Americans, there are Puerto Ricans, there are lots of different ethnic groups. And so I think you've got to be thinking about a diverse strategy there, a complex strategy there. And I think you've also got to be reminded of energizing African American voters and Black turnout as well. And then you look at just the sheer geography of it, right? Just the investment in organizing takes millions and millions and millions of dollars. And Republicans have the advantage there. And I just don't think we quite invest the level of resources that we need to as a party. Though we do invest some resources, we have to invest more, and we have to start earlier because it's just a bigger organizing challenge for us.
Let's move to the House races, and obviously we're certainly not going to go through all 345 or however many there are, 445, 35, but 218 is what you need to form a majority in the House of Representatives. At this stage, the Democrats have got 205. The Republicans are sitting on 217. There are 13, I think, undecided at this moment or haven't been called by all the major networks. The Democrats lost 8 seats. So it wasn't a red wave right across all these House races. Before we get to the ones where I want to ask you what the hell happened, where were the good stories that jumped out for you in terms of the House where the Democratic Party managed to hold back this tidal wave of enthusiasm for the Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really did. I think see just across the board. I think you saw candidates particularly in these suburban areas. I think about Lucy McBath in my home state of Georgia, where she was able to defend her seat. And I think you saw great candidates, but I also think you saw them messaging accomplishments, messaging progress, helping folks understand that maybe the economy hasn't fully turned around. We've still got work to do. Maybe inflation is still a challenge, but there are certain freedoms, rights that we still need to defend. And the Republican Party has not shown themselves to be the party of the last 2 years that want to defend and advance freedoms. And so I think that you saw a really strong contrasting message. So no matter where you were running, whether you were running in the suburbs or whether you were running in more rural areas or you were running in, a very diverse area like the one, like Lucy McBath's district, for example, but you saw Democrats creating a real contrast between the Republican or more extreme, more right-wing candidates in a lot of cases, and common sense, fairness, justice, progress. And so once the contrast was made, I think for voters, a lot of voters chose to move forward instead of getting stuck in extremism and obstructionism, which I think helped us on the whole.
A lot of the races where Democrats managed to hold on or indeed flip are all probably looking at New York, the state of New York, and saying, what the hell happened there? Because the number of seats that they lost in New York to the Republicans in the end may be the margin of difference between holding and losing the House. Do you have I mean, I know it's early days yet.
Yeah.
And as a Boston Red Sox, any opportunity to get stuck into New York, folks, I'll take that opportunity. I don't know if you want to jump on this bandwagon and go kicking with me as well. But New York, what happened there? I mean, I'm reading the New York Times every day, and obviously fingers are being pointed at everyone. They're pointing at the former governor. There's a whole bunch of different the head of the Senate. The head of the House of Reps up there. A whole bunch of different people are getting sort of fingered for why this was a terrible result. What's your take on it this early stage?
Yes, well, I too have heard various takes on what happened there. I think some folks point to the popularity or lack thereof of the governor. I think some folks point to some of her popularity in the city that didn't translate into the suburbs, into more rural areas as well, which resulted in some losses. And I think it's fair to look at the overall landscape and say, in a lot of cases, Democrats in a lot of cases, national trends kind of held true where folks rejected extreme or extremist or candidates, trumped back candidates. And in places where you had an incumbent governor, I think you had to also look at how is that person performing in terms of their popularity in the state, right? You look at a state like Georgia, for example, we didn't quite follow this national trend, right? Where our crazy candidate for Senate got beat and our governor was defeated, right? Because he was of the opposing party. You saw that ultimately the popularity of the sitting, head of the executor of the state did actually play into what the ultimate outcome was. So I don't think there's a single formula to say, it was applied everywhere. In some places it worked or didn't work. But I think you had to look at what was the statewide landscape. Where did, the popularity or the favorability toward government at the top of the statewide ticket fare? And then how did that affect a lot of the seats, locally, or the congressional seats in that state? And so I think that's probably more of the story of New York is, how did statewide elected popularity potentially fare when it came to the congressional seats that were in the state as well?
Let's talk about the gubernatorial races. There was a number of them that were being run across the country. In the end, the Democrats increased their number of governor houses that they sit in now to 24. The Republicans got 25. The wins, the big ones, was in Massachusetts, Maryland, and Arizona, which is a great win, which only got announced yesterday. Katie Hobbs defeating Carrie Lake. Your take on some of those governor races where the Democrats did well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we obviously have pointed to some national trends and the reasons why Democrats did well across the board. I think that, in cases where you have like a Katie Hobbs, running against again another, election denier, didn't help her much, who, argued that if the results of the election favored her, then, she would accept them. If they didn't, she wouldn't, which is, you know, kind of crazy and almost a little bit laughable.
Mm.
But I think you saw, Katie Hobbs run a very spirited campaign, but also folks again reject the extremism and the election denier narrative. And I think with that went, Carrie Lake. And so you saw a close margin because it's a hard fought state. But I think you ultimately saw, Katie Hobbs prevail because she has a record with folks in the state. Having been in elected office, I believe she was the Secretary of State previously. You saw her as somebody who folks felt like they could trust. You put that alongside kind of this crazy election denier, and I think the choice was clear. So I think that was another stark contrast, study in stark contrast of two different candidates. I think you were also speaking I think you were speaking specifically to states where Democrats did well. So I think that's what I would say about that. And I wasn't sure if you were going to transition to states where we didn't do
Georgia.
so well.
Yeah, I really want to get your thoughts on Georgia.
Yeah, talk about Georgia. I mean, Stacey Abrams will forever be a legend, ran an extremely spirited campaign. I think there are a couple things that you could unpack here. I don't think there's a single set of truths that would determine and explain the outcome. I think you had, one, Brian Kemp, despite being someone who signed a voter suppression bill into law, SB 202, he was seen, I think, against the backdrop of such a long list of election deniers. I think he was seen as the lesser of those evils. And I think for some people, they saw him buck Trump in 2020 one with the or in 2020 with the standing by the results of the election, etc. And I think he came out looking a bit rosy, right? I think he came out looking a bit like somebody who was on the side of right. And I think that despite that not being the truth, and ultimately him signing a bill into law that same, months later, that restricted Georgians' ability to vote. I think some people saw him against, the laundry list of crazy, as the lesser of the evils, and so I think that there was a bit of that playing into it. Um, I think that Brian Kemp being an incumbent governor, it's always going to be a slightly tougher race against an incumbent. Last time, remember, it was an open seat, and so there are those challenges as well. So I think that at least those are probably the two top line things I would point to um, with his performance.
Have you? Is it too early, Jonae, to start to look at county by county returns and comparing them to the vote that Senator Warnock received and the vote that Stacey Abrams was receiving? Are we seeing Republicans or independents turn up to the ballot and give a vote for Warnock, but not a vote for Stacey in certain key swing counties in urban parts of Atlanta?
Yeah, I think that there's still much to unpack with the county level data. I think what we saw broadly is that Herschel Walker underperformed Brian Kemp pretty significantly, which I think says something about the taste of Republican voters. To go to one guy and skip another one on the same side of the ballot, I think says something about where voters are. And I think I was always really interested to see what those top lines would be. Right, we were looking about who would split the ticket and who would actually vote for one and not the other. So to see that Herschel Walker um, ran behind Brian Kemp, I think is telling, especially going into the runoff. I think it calls into question what kind of support there will be from the Republican establishment for Herschel Walker in the general election. I think when you look at the Stacey Abrams and Senator Warnock, with the Stacey Abrams and Senator Warnock split, we did see that Warnock finished, ahead of Stacey, but I think early returns were saying about 130 or so thousand votes. And I think that one speaks to, you have to understand that folks were voting affirmatively for Senator Warnock and probably a bit against Herschel Walker in a way that um, voters were reject or kind of accepting Kemp and rejecting Warnock or rejecting Walker. So I think you kind of have to look at that foil. But he's a sitting United States senator. He's got name ID, and I think that though Stacey does herself have name ID, I think just understanding that Warnock finishing on top, I think speaks to where voters were making as much of a conscious choice for him as they were against Herschel Walker.
If we then sort of lift our eyes and look more broadly across the nation, there's a bit of a debate at the moment going on. If you compare both Senate and House races and compare those districts or those Senate races voted on Tuesday to the 2020 presidential, congressional candidates seem to do better than Biden did 2 years ago. So the question is asked then, did Democrats win in spite of the president or because of him? Because obviously this is a great result for him. And I think if you're you're working in Team Biden, you'd be running around the country going, "This is historic."
Yeah.
But at the same time, I just want to get your sense about, if you look at the numbers, was he a drag on the ticket?
Well, I think any time that you have a president that, has a better midterm election than presidents have had for the last, few decades, I think you could be hard to make an argument that he was a drag, right? Because, at the end of the day, despite how great the candidates may be on the ballot, I think people are looking at the reality of the world that we're living in and the challenges that we face. So I think to say that the progress that Biden has been able to make on some key issues was not a benefit or a help to Democratic candidates, I don't think that would be an accurate portrayal. I think that the progress he's been able to make did help the Democratic ticket. But again, we are in the midterms where voters are still going to take some issue to, well, my, my way of life is um, not the best it can be. But I certainly can see progress being made. I think that resonated in voters' minds. They looked at the alternative and saw Trump and his Trump campaign and his endorsed candidates and said, "We're going to wholly reject that." I think that was really the choice that voters were making, and so I'd say that there were certainly ways in which the progress that the Biden administration has made um, benefited candidates up and down the ballot, but certainly ways in which voters said, I'm not, we're not where we should be yet, but we need to keep moving forward. And I think that's where he was a support as well.
We spoke about the issue, the Dodd decision on women's health by the Supreme Court earlier in the year, and in our podcast before the midterms, we hypothesized, would this still be an issue or a motivating issue for Democratic voters and independents to turn out, because it happened so long ago. Obviously, at the time when it all came out, it really energized folks. What do you take from the results on Tuesday? Did we see women really turn out to vote for Democratic candidates? Was it something that was very much in the forefront of their minds? Did it drive them to the polls and want to try and use their vote to send a message to Washington that we don't support this radical anti-women agenda?
I think so. And I think that, if there was one thing that pollsters are said to have missed, it was how much of a motivating factor this would be for folks. I think people not only saw the attack on women's reproductive rights, but they also saw the attack on freedoms. I think, frankly, and first it's reproductive rights, but there are certainly other freedoms that previous court cases have protected: LGBTQ rights, the rights to interracial marriage. If the courts could do this for this one ruling, what's next? And so I think that there was a response to the institution that said, it is not right to take away rights which the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has voted to instate or to affirm. And so I think you saw folks really rejecting this notion that those rights be stripped away, and the politics that were behind those rights being stripped away. So women voting in high numbers, which we know, women do vote in high numbers, especially women of color. I think you saw this as an extra motivator in this election to really juice that turnout.
There was anecdotal evidence, certainly on polling day, of shots of young people on campuses right across the country queuing for hours to I assume they were queuing to vote. They weren't going to some sort of Harry Styles concert. Did we see? Did finally the young people turn out to vote in a midterm election and vote for progressive politics?
I mean, I'm very proud of the way that young people showed up in this election cycle. So many of the challenges that our country faces, so many of the challenges that we're trying to solve, will directly impact that age group long beyond the time in which the folks making the laws are even around. Right? We're talking about climate change. We're talking about reproductive rights. We're talking about the future of court cases that will decide the future of our country. And so it was wonderful to see young people not just turning out, but turning out in support of the progress that our country has made. And I feel like that we needed to also send a message, because I think that, young people are often counted as a voting bloc that has never participated at the level that it needs to, or the youth vote. There's much to do about whether the youth vote turned out, and I think that what we showed is that when youth are engaged on key issues that matter to them, and spoken to and engaged in a way where those progress on those issues speaks to their values, you see them turn out, right? And I think that's a message to politicians, to Congress, that if we want to, and to anyone running on the ballot in future elections, that if you want to get those votes, you have to earn those votes. And we have to have an agenda that appeals to young people. Now, the next 2 years will bear out if 2024 is a year where there's a bit of backlash on the progress we have or we haven't made. If we haven't made progress on some of these issues, but I think 2022 was an indicator that we are moving in the right direction.
I wondered about the whole, the election denying stuff and all of the court cases and the hearings in Congress and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I just wonder if that's sort of just Washington, beltway noise, and does it translate to people in voter land in the suburbs and the regions of the United States, and influence how they're going to vote. So I just thought, that's all. It's all people would like. That's all proceed. All politicians are corrupt, or they're all insane, or they're all in it for themselves, and that doesn't impact on my life and what I'm struggling with right now, which might be inflation or work or a good education for my kids or something like that. But it seemed to be that over the course of the last 2 years since January 6th, that if you sided with the argument that the elections were rigged, then it hurt you at the ballot box.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assumption that we can make?
Yes. When we had pretty much all election deniers lost. We saw that was a losing campaign strategy this year. And I'm so glad to see that, because I think there's been a lot of question on the impact of January 6th on the American electorate. How are voters really viewing that? How is that impacting how they saw accountability in government, accountability for President Trump, accountability for the party and the way that they responded to it? And I think this was that response. I think it was that response that the party that was at the helm, who president was at the helm of orchestrating that mob to storm the Capitol, and the unwillingness, frankly, to acknowledge and hold accountable those, everyone at the top, from Donald Trump all the way down. Some in his party have refused to call him out. I think Americans responded to that, right? Because if we are to live in a free and well-functioning democracy, there must be, above all things, accountability, right? And so I think that we saw voters say, hey, there's got to be some accountability. This is not right. And it remains to be seen how these election deniers and folks who have been beat in this election, where they will go, what they will do, how they will evaluate that narrative of election denying. Will it find its way into the American dialogue and discourse about future elections? We don't know yet, but I think we need to absolutely keep a vigilant eye on it as we move into 2024, especially given what might be happening with the Republican primary on that side.
We'll talk about that in a moment. It must have been reassuring, certainly on election night, as the results were coming in. It was reaffirming that Americans aren't insane.
Yeah.
Democracy was on the ballot.
Democracy,
and it somehow survived.
Democracy was in fact on the ballot. One of my key takeaways was not just Democrats running great candidates in some of these key races, there not being this red wave, but that democracy won, right? Americans were able to have their voice heard and send a message loud and clear. And that's what democracy is all about. That's what elections are all about Americans having that choice, and knowing that our process the process of democracy of electing our officials it works, and it only works when everyone agrees to the rules. And
Yeah.
I think that, where we saw the concessions, for example, where, we saw some refusals to concede for sure, but we saw some concessions there, and I think that that was key, because that's how this works, right? That's how elections work. And I remember, I think it was one candidate, I think it was Tim Ryan, who said in his acceptance speech, like, I have the honor to concede, and it was an odd thing to say when you're losing an election, but he pointed out that's how this works. You don't get to say you don't like the results of the election when you don't win. That's not how this works. And so that was an important statement, and I saw that narrative playing out in a number of different races as well.
And you can imagine that would Tim Ryan, I'm assuming, is not only speaking to the moment, but speaking into the future as well, because
Yes.
that will do well for him in terms of
Yes.
his own career.
Yeah.
In the eyes of fellow Buckeyes. Donald Trump, you and I sort of talked about this before the previous podcast, and I sort of hypothesized to you that Donald Trump is a drain on the Republican ticket. I said that he, apart from winning 2016, he lost 2018 midterms, he lost 2020 presidential, he lost the 2021 Georgia runoff, and now his candidates across the country have been resoundingly rejected by voters again. I think he should be at the top. I think he should win the Republican nomination for the presidency, because in 2024, he's going to get his ass handed to him, because I think most Americans now just think he is insane and they're not going to vote for him. Discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of Americans are quite disgusted with, and they're frankly sick of it. They're disgusted and they're sick of it. I think what we saw in the election results was people responding to the havoc that this is all wreaked on our democracy. Having to spend, you know, a year plus, having folks go around the country denying the results of the election, the criminality of January 6th, all of these things are things we've had to contend with against the backdrop of all of the other work that we all need to be doing, our elected officials need to be doing to move our country forward. I'm sure it's been a persistent thorn, but accountability needs to be sought, especially for the ways in which criminal acts were carried out. And I think that the Republican Party, I hope, is ready to reckon with that fact of what a drain that Donald Trump is on the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. But for the Democrats, he is a bit of a gift right now. And that, every time he opens his mouth or endorses a candidate, here they go. And this was a test of his effectiveness in this moment. And so I think a message was sent loud and clear. We'll see what is announced tonight. We'll see. But I think despite the challenges he creates, the drain that he's been really on his party in the midterms, you know, I think we're all foolish to assume he's just going to go away. He's a very prideful man who's never allowed, he's never allowed his imposition on his party to stop him from doing what it is he wants to do when he wants to do it. So they've created a bit of a monster there. So good luck.
This is an audio only medium, but if you could see Jonae's face as she said that, it would be priceless. I would, it's unfortunate we don't do this on YouTube. Adam Kinzinger, is that how you pronounce his surname? The guy that was one of the few Republicans that stood up against Trump. He gets primaried during primary season by a Trump election denier. So that candidate then runs and stands for the Republican Party in that Illinois district, congressional district, and then loses to a Democrat. Like, if you're whatever moderate Republicans are left in that organization, you must be standing up in caucus going, guys, this has got to stop. We're now losing seats.
Yep.
Like, sure, we might have just won the House by a slim margin, but
Yep. And they've really got to contend with this. I mean, like, if I was a Republican strategist, I'd really be looking at evaluating the Trump effect, how it impacted 2024 or 2022, and what we do going into 2024. And I don't think there are really any easy solutions there, right? They've got to figure out with this slim majority in the House, how to get things moving, how to negotiate within all of these factions of the Republican Party, these freedom caucuses and such. And Kevin McCarthy's going to have a nightmare on his hands pretty much every day of his life. It's probably going to be one of the longest 2 years of his life, certainly.
That's a
But
that's a penance. That's a penance for his sins.
yes, indeed it is. And, he's going to have to contend with that. But, if you're a Republican strategist, you're evaluating, like, how do we create some sort of buffer, right, between, the Trump effect, assuming that Trump is going to Trump for the next 2 years, so that they're not bleeding seats next year, or in 2024. I mean, it's going to be a real challenge, and I think that, the primary election potentially may help to solve some of that problem for them on the Republican presidential primary, but it may not solve all of their problems because we don't know the outcome, right? So they've got to have some different plans going into this next year and a half or two. So we absolutely shall see. I cannot wait to see how it plays out, frankly.
The the internals within the Republican Party will be interesting to even see play out in the next couple of days, because I obviously get a sense that there's obviously reading reports around Mitch McConnell's grip on the minority leadership within the Senate for the Republican Party is under threat from Senator from Florida, and I've got a cold at the moment, so I've got brain fog and forgot his friggin' name. What is his name? Tim Scott? No, who's the senator from Florida? Republican. Not Cruz, the East from
Rubio?
Texas, the other one. No, not Rubio, the other one. They only got two.
Oh, Rick Scott
Is it
and Rick Scott,
Oh, Rick
Marco
Scott.
Rubio.
Yeah, Rick Scott. Sorry, thank you. Brilliant. Like Rick Scott's apparently trying to muster up numbers to challenge McConnell. McCarthy, does he get the majority leadership when they go to vote on it? Like, I don't know the makeup of the numbers within the Republican Party, but this is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be very fascinating to watch. I mean, my assumption is that he, I know we're not in the business of making predictions here, but my assumption is that, he whips enough votes for his to win his race for speaker. I don't know that there's an alternative there. Like, there's a real number two that folks are tracking. I think his entire plan has got to center on how does he keep the different factions of his party happy and get anything done, get anything moving. I think that's going to be probably one of the most fascinating things to play out, is how that race, how the speaker conversation happens. I'd say for McConnell, he's been there for a while, and I think has stood the test of time. I don't assume he's going anywhere, at least in the immediate term. I would guess that would be my best assumption. I think he's someone who's proven that he can kind of weather a lot of different leadership scenarios and leadership roles, and still figure out how to build consensus and how to get things done. So I don't envision a change there.
Mitch McConnell is that political turd that won't flush, and other people call him a survivor. I call him a turd that won't flush because he's been around forever. Let's talk about key takeaways for the Democrats looking towards 2024. What are some of the key takeaways do you think the Democrats need to adhere to in order to prepare for 2024?
Well, I would call out three things in terms of preparation for 2024. I think, the first one is absolutely going to be, investing in organizing, starting early. If we are competing in states like Florida, if we're going to compete in states like Ohio, we've got to start laying the groundwork early. These are going to be states that were tough in the last presidential election. And if we're going up against Trump again, if we don't have a robust strategy and the resources to match it, to build an on-the-ground organizing infrastructure, then we're going to have some real challenges next year, or in 2024. I think that's got to be a key focus of how are we investing the resources early to make that happen, whether it's organizer training, and hiring, whether it's putting organizers on the ground earlier than we might have, we have to have a strategy there. I think the second thing I would point to is really just holding these election deniers accountable. Anyone who has managed to survive this cycle where we seemingly flushed most of them out. There are still sitting members of Congress who didn't have tough primaries and are still serving in Congress who we're going to have to watch out for, especially if Trump and the impact of him potentially running again draws folks out to the fringes, right? If it draws them back into this narrative because he's this magnetic force for voters. And it's going to be hard for elected officials, candidates, not to get sucked back up into that narrative, and it's going to be a really dangerous one. So I think we've got to really maintain our vigilance there, because before you know it, it's kind of like that what is it, an ivy of bamboo? It kind of like wraps itself around democracy, and before you know it, it's like choking it out, right? And so I think we can't take our eye off the ball there. And then if there was, I guess, a third thing, I think it's going to be messaging our accomplishments, not only over the last 2 years, over the next 2 years. I think it's no secret that Democrats do at times struggle to really bring our message to voters and help them understand what we've done, where we've made progress, where we can make progress with additional 4 years in the White House. That's going to be key, because common sense solutions, delivering on campaign promises, that is going to be the one of the many tools in our toolbox to fight back the crazy amidst bad candidates, potential election deniers next go round, a potential Trump candidacy. We're going to be firing on all cylinders, right? And we need a really good message in order to do that. And so I think that's going to be probably the third thing that I would say the Democrats need to fine tune and get ready for battle next year and in 2024.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating next 2 years in the lead up to the next general election in the United States. Jonae, as always, thank you so much for coming on the show again and getting your insights. You're a fountain of wisdom and helping us unpack what has been, in the end, a surprisingly hopeful round of elections in the United States.
It has indeed. I'm much more pleased with this outcome than any of the other alternatives. And I'll say in summary, it's really good to be right.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And to get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday. Socially Democratic was brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn Lawyers have spent more than a century paving the hard path to justice for everyday Australians. They've helped over 500,000 Australians turn their situation around, and they know how the system works. Their experience and skills means you'll get the best results possible. Find out more on their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. Maurice Blackburn, experience you can count on.